We know that at the next NATO summit, it is planned to announce the beginning of a large-scale program to further increase the alliance's capabilities. In order to implement it, the military budgets of NATO countries will be increased. Meanwhile, the members of the bloc are already spending more on military purposes than all the countries of the world combined, and because of this, it becomes obvious who actually provokes global militarization and arms race. It turns out that Putin is criticizing Donald Trump because it was the American president who insisted that NATO allies increase defense spending to 5% of GDP. What can we expect from Russia in response? Will the Kremlin leader be able to stop the militarization of Europe, and how is Russia reacting to the new meeting between Zelenskyy and Trump? We'll talk about it on the air. My name is Anastasia Norytsyna, and with us on the line is journalist, analyst, internationalist Alexander Demchenko. Hello, Alexander. It's a pleasure to welcome you. Hello, Anastasia. Hello, everyone. Friends, write comments, give a like to this video, and indicate from which country and city you are watching us. The 34th NATO summit opened today in The Hague, where Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy arrived. For the first time since the beginning of the large-scale invasion, he appeared in classic clothes. He changed militarized khaki for a more formal image, wore a jacket, linen shirt, and classic pants, which still retain elements of military style. It is known that Zelenskyy is scheduled to meet with Donald Trump at the summit, and literally in these minutes it has already begun. We record the broadcast at 16 Kyiv. We will follow what is happening on the margins of the summit. The meeting between Zelenskyy and Trump has already taken place. Alexander, how do you assess it? Did the image really work?
Что же происходит на полях этого саммита. Но то, что Зеленский и Трамп встретились, Александр, как вы это оцениваете? Неужели костюм сработал?
You see, Vladimir Zelenskyy came in with a Trump card. Trump asked where the trumps are. Zelenskyy showed that he has a small one, a king or an ace. It's hard to say, but definitely a trump. The same Malyuk, capable of destroying 41 Russian strategic airplanes. Then he pulled out another trump card. It turned out that the same Malyuk planted 2 kilo 200 grain of explosives under the Crimean bridge. Now Zelenskyy appeared in front of Trump in a suit, which he himself said earlier. He wanted to see him in formal wear. So he waited. Vladimir Putin, who you just showed, was advocating the urgent militarization of Russia because of the threat from NATO. While he was saying this, Trump had already arrived in The Hague, and the alliance countries had decided to gradually increase defense spending to 5% of GDP. And as NATO Secretary General Rutte noted, the alliance will be the first to fully convert industry to military use, which no doubt is extremely troubling news for Putin. I would say catastrophic. I will explain later why. Now, the entire NATO border with Russia will be covered with bombs, mines, and explosives, and as stated, not a single Russian soldier will pass through. Even though Vladimir Putin is apparently preparing a major war, a major escalation with NATO, and given his plans for the fall and winter, he may try to reopen the northern front from Belarus against Ukraine, or provoke a conflict with the Baltic member states of the alliance. Therefore, I predict a major war, a military adventure, or an attempt to organize large-scale hostilities, with the initiative coming from Putin against NATO, possibly in the very near future. Hence, such active preparations, mobile and underground hospitals, what the alliance countries are now doing. The meeting between Trump and Zelenskyy confirms that Ukraine has not disappeared from the international agenda, even after the Iran-Israel escalation. NATO and Europe remain focused on Ukraine, and it remains a key priority.
Все-таки Украина после вот этой всей истории Ирано-Израильской не ушла с повестки дня, что фокус НАТО и фокус Европы в первую очередь он на Украине.
After the Iran-Israel confrontation, it became clear that Ukraine had become even more important to European security. Recent events, including Malyuk's operations against Russia and Masada's actions against Iran, have shown that the nature of warfare has changed to global warfare and that it is possible to defeat a superior adversary. Already there are statements from the presumed future commander-in-chief of NATO forces, linked to Trump, that Ukraine is capable of winning the war. Most notably, the alliance countries have made clear to Russia their readiness to confront it. There was a positive message from Trump as well. He recognized that something needs to change as the situation is getting out of control. This was taken positively, including Macron, who is now openly talking about it. All this points to a possible new attempt by Trump to establish a direct dialogue with Putin.
Что все выходит из-под контроля. Это, и, кстати, европейцы восприняли, во всяком случае, Макрон, который об этом сейчас заявляет, это все положительно, как положительный сигнал. Это означает, что, вероятнее всего, сейчас будет очередная попытка Трампа поговорить с Путиным.
Trump's attempt to engage in a dialogue from a position of strength looks particularly telling against the backdrop of the Iranian bombings and his use of powerful aerial bombs that are second only to nuclear weapons in destructive power. This seems to have impressed Putin, as he now realizes that Trump can act outside of predictable frameworks, including imposing high duties and tough sanctions, despite Secretary of State Rubio's claims of a temporary pause. Expectedly, Putin will test his opponent's resolve by analyzing their reactions. In light of this, Ukrainian cities, Kyiv, Dnipro, Kharkiv, Odessa, and others, should prepare for a possible escalation. Ukrainian security agencies and authorities are warning of the likelihood of massive airstrikes, as Putin is likely to try once again to test the limits of what is acceptable and see if Trump will remain steadfast or cave into pressure.
Удара Владимира Путина, авиаударов, он к ним готовится, об этом сообщают украинские силовые ведомства, об этом сообщает украинская власть, потому что Владимир Путин хочет в очередной раз попытать счастье и узнать, а Дональд Трамп условно все-таки еще прогнется или не прогнется.
Whether Donald Trump will negotiate with Vladimir Putin is a big question. He now has certain Trump cards he can use in negotiations, and it is the coming weeks that could prove decisive both for the course of the war and for changing its phase. If Putin does not make concessions, and if Trump, having attempted a peace deal, a truce, or at least a short-term pause, is again rebuffed, as he has already been in the Iranian situation, it is highly likely that he will react violently. Even though the victory over Iran looks ambiguous, Trump still presents it as his political credit. If Putin again shows intransigence, Trump could snap, and it would be an extremely difficult period for Russia. It is especially important to note that as of July 1st, Russia is beginning processes that could lead to a deep economic, financial, and social crisis, and that is worth talking about separately.
Тем более, Анастасия, важно здесь подчеркнуть, что 1 июля в России наступает, простите за моветон, полная задница. И начинается тот самый экономический, финансовый кризис, социальный кризис, который многие предсказывали, и об этом можем еще поговорить дальше.
Yes, we'll talk about the economy and the so-called International Economic Forum that took place in St. Petersburg, but I will return to the meeting between Zelenskyy and Trump. Information has emerged that Trump said at a closed meeting with the heads of NATO countries, the situation in Ukraine is completely out of control. Something must be done about it. According to Bloomberg, the meeting participants took this signal as potentially positive in the context of Trump's possible cooperation with Ukraine. Do you think this is really a positive signal, and can Trump and Zelenskyy today, for example, develop a plan for strikes against Russian military facilities?
Положительный ли это сигнал, и могут ли сегодня Трамп и Зеленский, например, разработать план, как бомбить российские военные объекты?
I don't know if Trump is developing a specific plan for Ukraine, but I am sure that Ukraine will soon be striking Russian military facilities without him. I predict that a new active phase will come soon. Pay attention to the statement of the head of the security service of Ukraine, Vasyl Malyuk. He reported about the prevention of assassination attempts on President Zelenskyy and his brother Yermak. Moreover, the assassination attempts were attempted to be organized on the territory of Poland, and Polish security services foiled them. Malyuk also said that there was an attempt to blow up the SBU central office on Volodymyrska Street in Kyiv. Such statements by the head of the security service indicate a serious threat and possible preparation of a tough response from Ukraine. Whether the target will be Lubyanka, the general staff on Frunzenskaya Street, or Arbat itself is still unknown, but the hint is transparent.
этого силового органа, это означает одно. Это означает, что готовится жесткая ответка по Москве. Я не знаю, что будет гореть. Лубянка будет гореть, Генштаб, который находится на Фрунзенской, близ Арбата, Арбат разнесут к чертям собачьим. Но я
Most
понимаю,
likely,
что
strikes on
вероятность всего
decision-making
планируются
centers
удары по
and
центрам
important
принятия
military
решений
facilities
по
are
каким-то
planned,
значимым
with
военным
special
объектам, и
operations
что
under
все-таки
Malyuk's
реакционный
leadership
этап будет
continuing in a
продолжаться.
new format.
Другой
We do not know
параметр,
what exactly this
другое
will
дело,
lead
что мы
to,
не знаем,
where and
как,
with what
чем это
force the
обернется,
strike will be
куда это
carried out,
куда
but
попадет
everything
этот
points to the
удар,
preparation of a tough
на
response.
что этот
For
удар будет
Kyiv,
направлен, но тем не
Dnipro,
менее,
Kharkiv,
вероятнее всего
Odessa,
нам необходимо
Belgorod,
ожидать очень
Dnistrovsky,
жесткой
for
ответки
educational
из за
institutions,
Днепр и за
under the
Днепра,
rubble
за
of which
Харьков,
teachers and
за
lecturers, fortunately
Белгород-Днестровск,
without
за
children,
учебное
were trapped.
заведение, где
For
подзывали
the
живых
19 schools,
преподавателей,
10
стрелять в
kindergartens,
возмещение.
other
И за те
institutions and
19
hospitals on the
школ, и за те
territory
все
of
садики,
Dnipro,
и за
as well
другие
as for the
учебные
tragedy with
заведения
the
и
train,
больницы на
which was
территории
hit with
Днепра. Это
Iskanders.
поезд, который был,
The response is likely
по
to be
которому
sharp and
били
decisive,
снарядами, да,
regardless
которая
of
вот эта
Trump's
трагедия,
involvement.
которая случилась на
At the same
территории
time,
украинского
Ukraine
Днепра, и за
desperately
которую
needs
ответка,
U.S.
в
support.
общем, очень
In
жесткая
order to remain
будет.
sustainable, it
Я
is important to
предполагаю,
ensure that there
что
are
и без
separate
Трампа
spending lines
Украина
to
все
help
это
Ukraine
проигрывает.
in the new fiscal year,
Конечно же,
which
Украине
ends in
необходима
America in
помощь от
August and the
США.
budget
И
is set in
Украине необходимо, чтобы в
September-October.
следующем финансовом году, который заканчивается в Америке в августе и начинается принятие военного бюджета с сентября по октябрь, чтобы были статьи расходов на Украину.
The most remarkable thing about the Iran-Israel story is not American bombs or B-2 bombers, but Tomahawk missiles, the very same 30 missiles that destroyed 2 Iranian nuclear facilities. Ukraine has long been pushing for the delivery of these missiles. If both Vladimir Putin and the Americans realize this, and Europe steps up the pressure, especially against the backdrop of a growing confrontation, there is a chance for a change of heart. Spokesman Peskov has already said that the memorandums are not under consideration, suggesting that another Russian ultimatum has been taken off the table and possibly hidden in a drawer again. This could be taken as a signal to Trump that the ultimatums have been temporarily postponed and further steps can be discussed. However, if Putin decides to act tough and push Trump to the limit, the consequences could be extremely unpleasant for Russia.
И мы можем дальше поговорить и порассуждать с тобой, Дональд. Так вот, мне представляется, что если Владимир Путин полностью разозлит Трампа, если Владимир Путин заортачится, если
If the Europeans and Americans finally realize that the situation is out of control and concrete steps must be taken against Putin, Ukraine is likely to receive both new weapons and funding. We are also talking about the very tomahawks that Ukraine has long sought and whose effectiveness was demonstrated in Iran. It is not known exactly how many missiles it will receive, one, dozens, or hundreds, but everything leads to the fact that Ukraine will soon have its own long-range ballistic systems capable of strikes. And we are talking about possible strikes on Moscow, St. Petersburg, Leningrad, and Moscow regions. I don't know if the mayor of Moscow actually had a heart attack or a stroke, but if Ukrainian missiles hit those regions, he will definitely have a heart attack. Therefore, we can expect Ukraine to strike strategic military facilities in these very cities where they are concentrated.
Мэр Москвы уже или воскресал, но я больше чем уверен, что если ракеты дальнобойные украинские полетят по Москве, то у него точно будет инфаркт, и он скончается. Поэтому необходимо ожидать ударов со стороны Украины по военным объектам и по военным целям Москвы и Питера, где они более всего и размещены, кстати.
If Special Operation Web 2.0 continues, we can expect large-scale bombings on Russian territory, targeting key military facilities, enterprises, or targets, such as airplanes, the Pacific or Baltic Fleet. The recent attack on a Russian military boat in the Black Sea has already sent a telling signal. The impression is that there will soon be a dramatic change of course on the part of the US and Europe, from caution to decisive action. With Vladimir Putin calling for further militarization, demanding that Kamezov and the defense complex ramp up production, sequestering the budget, cutting civilian spending, and preparing for a possible mobilization of 500,000 troops, NATO has little choice but to react harshly. Supporting Ukraine and strategically pivoting toward it becomes inevitable to send a message that further escalation will not go unanswered.
Милитаризации еще большего количества вооружений. Если Владимир Путин проводит секвестр бюджета, сокращает гражданские расходы и все бросает на оборонку, если же в России говорят о 500-тысячной мобилизации населения, что это необходимо сделать, иначе будет проигрыш в войне, то у НАТО действительно нет другого выхода, кроме как поставить Путина на место, и кроме как взять и просто целенаправленно поддержать Украину и перевернуть эту доску к чертовой матери.
Ukraine is gradually regaining territories temporarily occupied by the Russian army, including parts of Sumy region, as evidenced by statements by Commander-in-Chief Syrsky. This confirms that the summer offensive from the north initiated by Putin is gradually suffocating. This is an important sign, especially given the activity of the Ukrainian armed forces, special forces, intelligence, and SBU, which have conducted numerous operations aimed at destroying tank echelons, the navy, warehouses, arsenals, fuel bridges, and other key facilities. All these actions have weakened the enemy's offensive potential. In such a context, it is clear that Putin, faced with the failure of the offensive, will seek to further escalate and attempt to increase the pressure.
И поезда, которые везли эшелоны танков, и флот, и склады, и арсеналы, и мосты, по которым проезжали подвозчики топлива, и огромное количество других заводов, пароходов, предприятий и всего, чего только можно было уничтожить, дабы это наступление захлебнулось. И это означает, что Владимир Путин, захлебываясь вот этим вот всем,
most likely, this is what he will do in the near future. So I urge everyone who is listening to us right now to be vigilant, be careful, be sure to respond to alarms and take care of your loved ones. Going to shelter is critical. As for Donald Trump's behavior, over the past 2 days he has emphasized several times that Putin offered help on Iran, but he responded, "Help better with Russia." By doing so, Trump made it clear that it is Putin who is responsible for the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. Perhaps there is a signal hidden in these words. If Putin does not reconsider his actions, Trump may start to put him under severe pressure.
Как вы думаете, есть ли тут какой-нибудь подтекст, что именно как раз Трамп имеет в виду, что если Путин сейчас не остановится, то он действительно будет на него давить?
After the events between Iran and Israel, Trump apparently got a taste of power. Not only has he shown resolve, but he seems not to have anticipated how radical his response might be. His statements and behavior showed that he could use tough measures, resorting again to bombing and launching lethal weapons. He learned that the U.S. has even more powerful weapons and began publicly comparing his actions to Hiroshima and Nagasaki, posting videos on social media of U.S. planes striking Iran. This suggests that he has entered a certain state of excitement and determination. Putin, on the other hand, expected very different behavior from Trump, delaying deadlines, postponing decisions, being able to act with impunity. He expected that he would have time to increase Russian escalation in Ukraine and pressure on Israel through Iran. But it turned out that Trump is able to change the tone abruptly, act impulsively, and use force when he sees fit.
И войти в раж, войти во вкус, и бомбить все к чертовой матери, если только просто ему захочется это сделать.
After another harsh statement by Medvedev against the U.S. and Trump, it is clear that Donald Trump is capable of responding quickly and harshly to such challenges. There is speculation that Putin, realizing the consequences of such outbursts, may have had an internal showdown with Medvedev, especially against the backdrop of his subsequent public apology, which stands in stark contrast to his previous rhetoric. This episode may indicate a change in the Kremlin's tactics and internal tensions in its inner circle. In parallel, the U.S. is intensifying contacts with Lukashenko, who appears reluctant to be drawn into the escalation of the conflict from the north. He sees Russian planes, bombs, and missiles being moved into the country, and is obviously trying to distance himself from the upcoming escalation, realizing the risks. All this points to changes in the positions of the key players and a possible break in the dynamics of the confrontation.
Который, вероятно, понимает, для чего Владимир Путин свозит туда к нему военные самолеты, а также авиабомбы и ракеты для воздух-воздух и воздух-земля. То есть он прекрасно понимает, к чему все идет. Ему это не нравится, и он пытается с этого поезда соскочить.
The situation for Vladimir Putin is extremely unfavorable. Economic problems are growing, and even the head of the Ministry of Economic Development, Reshetnikov, did not hesitate to say right in front of Putin that the country is entering recession. At the same time, Putin himself demands the widespread use of the Russian language and a ban on foreign words and signs, and here a term from the Western economic lexicon is being used. Instead of recession, it would be easier to say that Russia is facing serious difficulties. There is no full-fledged budget, There is widespread downsizing, unemployment is growing, hundreds of thousands of enterprises may stop working, the coal industry is standing still, and key industries are closing down. On July 1st, new tariffs for housing and utilities will be introduced, and millions of citizens will be unable to pay for services. All this leads to a systemic crisis, an economic catastrophe. This is a deadlock, and starting from July, the country is entering a phase of large-scale upheavals, which the authorities are aware of but apparently are unable to prevent. Putin understands perfectly well that at current oil prices, with Trump, with pressure from Europe, with the global situation and the domestic crisis, his position is becoming increasingly vulnerable. The defense industry can't cope anymore, the companies can't provide the necessary volumes, and Chemezov has told him directly. Putin realizes that he has the resources to fight until 2026, but is betting on constant escalation, hoping to save himself. He is considering a large-scale war, even though the West has already calculated that a global conflict could cost the world economy $1.5 trillion. But apparently, this is an acceptable price for him for the sake of preserving power, the throne, and the influence of his family.
Но я думаю, что и эту цену Путин готов заплатить, лишь бы сохранить свою власть, лишь бы сохранить свой трон, и лишь бы сохранить в широком смысле влияние своей семьи.
By the way, Reshetnikov did voice this about the recession, but we understand perfectly well that when Kremlin representatives voice some information, the reality usually turns out to be much bleaker. Even the propagandist Mardan was forced to admit that things are bad with the Russian economy. Let's listen to what he said. Recession is negative growth, a kind of euphemism invented by the Russian bureaucracy. In essence, it is the price the country pays for war because any war is very expensive. I was actually thinking that Russians might be ready now, or rather Putin might decide to take a little pause to save the economy. Vladimir Putin will be ready to make such a pause, conditionally, when he runs out of money or when he realizes that the situation is really critical. Trump has a key moment. He can accelerate developments by increasing sanctions pressure, initiating tough negotiations with Putin, influencing the oil market, and shutting down shadowy Russian oil export schemes. All of this is within his power. The question is whether he will go for these measures, because within his administration there are opposing groups with different views on foreign policy. Perhaps Trump will try to restart the negotiation process with Putin, but this time through ultimatums, pressure, economic, financial, or even military. The goal is to achieve at least a temporary ceasefire. Putin will probably refuse, believing that he is in control of the situation. This could be his biggest mistake because the global landscape has changed dramatically in the past 7 to 8 days, especially after the brief Iran-Israel war, and the Kremlin seems to be underestimating these shifts.
И я считаю, что это будет самая колоссальная его ошибка. Мне представляется, что они до конца не оценили, насколько изменилась ситуация за последнюю неделю. За последние 7-8 дней вот этой вот кратковременной, 12 дней этой кратковременной Ирано-Израильской войны.
The situation has indeed changed radically. It has become obvious that Putin is losing the support of his partners, is unable to stand up to either the political or technological power of the United States, and is unable to cope with the challenges posed by Trump. U.S. missiles and aircraft are demonstrating superiority over Russian technology, which is proving to be unreliable and outdated. At the same time, it is becoming clear that the Kremlin does not fully realize the magnitude of the changes taking place, and therein lies the risk. Putin may soon begin to make strategic miscalculations, the consequences of which would be fatal for him. The announced recession is just the tip of the iceberg. The real picture shows a systemic crisis. Commodity industries, including oil and gas, agriculture, coal, and metallurgy, are in deep recession. As a result, hundreds of thousands of Russians may lose their jobs, and pensioners may find it impossible to pay for utilities and buy food. All this brings the country closer to a large-scale social catastrophe.
И что сотни тысяч людей в России окажутся на улицах, и что пенсионеры будут пачками просто подыхать на улицах российских городов и сел. Потому что у них не будет денег заплатить за эти тарифы, заплатить за эти продукты и заплатить за все, что там есть.
Current events in Russia look like a growing crisis that is literally breaking into the daily lives of ordinary citizens and taxpayers. This is not just an economic downturn, but a harbinger of the catastrophe that has been warned about for so long. And if this crisis finally engulfs the country, perhaps only then will there be a chance for the first cautious steps towards a ceasefire. But right now, all indications are that Vladimir Putin will continue to test Donald Trump, try to trick him, use manipulation, and escalate tensions. That said, the U.S. intervention in the Iran-Israel standoff has demonstrated a new approach on Trump's part, more decisive, proactive, and unpredictable. Putin seems to be seriously underestimating this transformation.
Что сейчас после Ирано-израильского противостояния и вмешательства Америки мы видим уже другого Трампа. И мне кажется, что Владимир Путин вот этого Трампа очень сильно недооценивает.
Alexander, you say that Putin is ready for escalation and is focusing especially on Ukraine because he will continue shelling our territory. But is there a threat to Europe right now? Could they stage provocations on the border with NATO countries to see if Article 5 will work? Putin is probably preparing a major escalation, and the Zapad 2025 exercise in Belarus is proof of that. Similar scenarios have already been played out in 2021-2022, and now it seems that Moscow is once again considering pressuring the region. The Suwalki corridor scenario remains relevant. It can be used to connect Russia with the Kaliningrad region via Belarus, isolating the Baltic states from Poland. The option with Narva and other Estonian cities is also not excluded. Relocation of equipment, transfer of saboteurs, possible presence of mercenaries and instructors on the territory of Belarus, everything points to the preparation for a new phase. Deliveries by rail and air are logistics for a serious offensive or provocation. It seems that Putin is betting on a forceful scenario and counts on surprise and intimidation.
Армию белорусского государства. Все это не просто так, как не просто так и то, что Владимир Путин свозит и по железным дорогам, и по воздуху, туда и системы вооружения, и самолеты, и снаряды, и так далее, и тому подобное. Он готовится к большой провокации, он готовится к большой эскалации.
The question is whether it will be allowed to realize all these steps. The U.S. understands what is going on perfectly well. Intelligence is working effectively, satellite control has been established, and it is America that controls outer space, not Russia. All of Trump's statements were not made in a vacuum. They coincided with the talks between KLG and Lukashenko, with the Iran-Israel crisis, and with Zelenskyy passing information to European leaders about planned provocations in Europe. All of this speaks to the seriousness of the moment. Putin is clearly escalating and apparently preparing for a major conflict. The key question is whether he will be stopped or allowed to follow through with his plan. The fate of Europe is being decided right now, and this week could be a turning point. Very soon it will become clear whether the balance of power has changed and whether radical decisions have been made, among which may be a command to conditionally eliminate Vladimir Putin's regime.
Когда уже будет дан приказ на условную утилизацию режима Владимира Путина.
NATO countries are indeed taking concrete steps to strengthen their defenses. Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, Poland, and Finland are ready to mine areas along their borders with Russia, as reported by the British newspaper The Telegraph. The measures are linked to the intention to withdraw from the Ottawa Convention, which prohibits the use of anti-personnel mines, and signal that states are taking the threat seriously. It is a way to prevent possible aggression from Russia. Putin responded at an economic forum by saying that such worries are unfounded and that Russia has no plans for attacks. However, in parallel, Russian propagandists, including Solovyov, have made quite explicit statements confirming that the Kremlin is gearing up for war with NATO. Such a discrepancy between the official position and media rhetoric suggests a double game and increases distrust in the international environment. Why do we need peace? Why do we need it if we're going to be at war all our lives? Vasily Milovich, if we hadn't started, Donbass would have been destroyed by now. It's either us at war or them. Peace makes no sense until our basic issues are resolved. Europe is trying to fight us. It will be destroyed. How's that for a statement like that? One of the elements of the SBU special operation may be the symbolic stitching of a drone into Solovyov's body. I assume that every morning he undergoes a check to see if a bug or some device has been implanted in him. There is probably anxiety in the Russian media environment. They fear Malyuk, Budanov, and other Ukrainian security forces. They may already be applying special defenses, arranging inspections, and being paranoid, fearing a repeat of the stories with trucks, scooters, and other unexpected means of attack. Vladimir Putin has previously clearly stated that he needs Sumy region and then the whole Ukraine. A legitimate question arises: why does he need all of Ukraine when he has previously claimed that the Russian border does not end anywhere? This indicates a strategic goal, to use the territory of Ukraine as a springboard for further advancement into Europe, with ambitions to restore the former empire.
Это означает только одно, что Владимиру Путину нужна вся Украина только для одной цели, для дальнейшего наступления на Европу, для покорения стран Европейского Содружества, только для одной цели.
Since 2007-2008, Putin has been actively thinking about how he would make history. First he needed Crimea, then a full-scale war. Now apparently he is planning a new large-scale adventure, preparing to use strike systems, including Oreshnikov's, aimed at Ukraine and potentially Europe, suggests serious intentions. Increasing the size of the army, funding contractors, and modernizing the armed and ground forces are not just declarations. He is purposefully moving toward a major war. His official statements about peacefulness do not stand up to any criticism, because in 2021 he assured that Russia would not attack Ukraine, and Lukashenko said that aggression would not start from the territory of Belarus. Everything happened exactly the opposite. So when Putin claims that he is not planning a war with Europe, it is more of a signal that he is preparing for it. And if Patrushev and Naryshkin are trying to convince that they want to avoid a conflict with NATO, we should expect the opposite: escalation.
Все будет. Если Владимир Путин говорит, что он не хочет большой войны в Европе и не планирует нападать, надо считать с точностью до наоборот. Планирует. Если Нарышкин и Патрушев говорят, что они хотят предотвратить большое противостояние, чтобы ракеты НАТО не били по Калининграду.
Rumors that Ukraine and Britain are allegedly planning attacks on the U.S. fleet in the Baltic Sea should most likely be read with the exact opposite. It is Russia that could be developing a scenario of destroying U.S. ships in order to then blame Ukraine, Britain, or NATO and use the incident as a pretext for escalation. Provocations in Kaliningrad, organized by Russia itself to create a pretext for military action, look quite likely. These signals are quite transparent and do not go unnoticed, neither in the US nor in Europe, especially in professional intelligence circles. The statements of propagandists like Solovyov do not deserve to be taken seriously, while Putin's own words must be taken in an inverted logic. When he says he is not planning an attack, it probably means the opposite. His rhetoric, which contradicts his actions, points to the preparation of a large-scale military scenario aimed at preserving personal power. After the failures and crisis he himself caused in Ukraine, he is now testing the limits of Europe's strength, hoping to scare it into retreat. But things are looking up, and he has miscalculated badly with NATO, with Trump, and with the European Union. The Financial Times reports that Russia has stockpiled about 13,000 missiles of various ranges. This is probably not only for strikes against Ukraine. At the same time, there was information from Poland. NATO plans to hold exercises in response to Russian maneuvers in Belarus scheduled for September. This was announced by Polish Defense Minister Kosiniak Kamysz. The exact date of the exercise has not been named yet, but it will be called Iron Defender. It is good that the Poles will have exercises, but we could use peacekeepers, supplies of Taurus, sufficient ATAK-EMS, tanks, equipment, ammunition, and stable intelligence support, especially satellite support. This would have radically changed the situation. There would have been no advance of Russian troops in Sumy region, key Russian enterprises would have burned, and Putin would have had no opportunity to plan a new offensive. Things would have been different from the time of Prigozhin's putsch 2 years ago. But because of the Americans' delay and Europe's caution, which was afraid of provoking Russia, the situation turned out differently. Now we can only hope that the situation will change after the NATO summit. Perhaps my expectations are in vain, but I remain optimistic and believe that today, this very night, and tomorrow morning, fateful decisions can be made for the good of Ukraine.
Как бы не настращать Россию, как бы не настропалить Путина, мы увидели с вами тот результат, который мы видим сейчас. К большому сожалению. Я надеюсь, что сейчас ситуация изменится, в особенности после этого саммита НАТО. Но, быть может, все мои вот эти надежды и грезы – это все артель напрасный труд. Но посмотрим. Я все-таки человек-оптимист, и я предполагаю, что будут приняты важные судьбоносные заявления и решения сейчас, вот буквально в этот вечер, на завтрашнее утро, и я надеюсь, что все изменится.
I would like to believe this, but I recall the words of Ukrainian President Zelenskyy, which he spoke about at a meeting with journalists. I was there, and he said that Europe is not yet considering to drive its peacekeepers on the territory of Ukraine. Well, how? They're discussing it all, but I agree all of them are not, and it's all because Europe still hasn't decided if it's ready to be with Ukraine to the end, even if the United States of America won't be with us. For us, the biggest problem is not Trump or America, but Europe. Over the past 3.5 years, it was the U.S. that provided Ukraine with everything it needed to deter Russia, from weapons to modernizing an army that now differs dramatically from the 2021-2022 model. It was the U.S. that facilitated enhanced combat capabilities and high-level operations. While Europe has long relied on American defense and did not invest in strengthening its security, now it has become clear that America can change course or focus on domestic affairs at any time, and the Europeans are not ready for that. They are starting to think about how to defend themselves, but time is almost gone. If they don't support Ukraine now, they may not have enough strength, funds, or resources later. If the crisis develops slowly, it would be possible to prepare for decades, but the current situation requires immediate solutions.
Но ситуация показательна в этом плане тем, что если они не будут помогать Украине, так они потом столкнутся с тем, что им просто не хватит ни сил, ни средств, ни денег, да, потому что очень мало времени. Если бы ситуация развивалась десятилетиями, наверное, бы они все модернизировались и были бы готовы.
The situation is evolving rapidly, and Putin continues to force the issue. This means that if Europe does not provide timely and adequate support to Ukraine, it risks direct aggression that could devastate the continent, including the massive use of systems such as the hazelnut. This is why Europeans need to act urgently. President Zelensky's presence at the summit is not just a diplomatic gesture, but an attempt to once again deliver a key message. A major war has begun, and to stop it, a decisive blow must be struck against the Putin regime, just as was done with the Iranian nuclear program. Destroying infrastructure is often the only way to deter an aggressor. The question remains as to how effective the Iranian facilities were neutralized. The Israeli and Omani intelligence reports should provide the answer. But history shows that the only way to stop a nuclear threat is to strike at it. This has already been proven by the actions of Malyuk, Zelenskyy, and Mossad.
И мы тогда поймем, уничтожены или нет. Но единственный вариант остановить агрессора с ядерной дубиной – это ударить по этой ядерной дубине. Это продемонстрировал Малюк, это продемонстрировал Зеленский, и это продемонстрировал Моссад.
You have captured the essence of what is happening absolutely clearly. No one knows whether the Mossad or the CIA will get involved, whether Russia's nuclear threat will be neutralized, but one thing is clear. Only decisive actions can contain Putin. Trump and European leaders have everything for this. Frozen assets that should have been used long ago, strategic pressure points such as the Danish Straits and Kaliningrad, the ability to influence China, for which the European market is much more important than the Russian market. And powerful tools remain: sanctions, which can be tightened, and precision weapons, including Tauruses. Western countries have at their disposal intelligence, agents, and everything necessary to activate the impact on the regime at the right moment. The only question is the political will. Every day of delay costs more and more, and the consequences are becoming more and more dangerous not only for Ukraine, but for Europe itself. If you want, I can make this text in the form of a short column or an essay. It is just on the topical issues of the day.
Другой вопрос, хотят или не хотят. Другой вопрос, провернут или нет. И чем дольше они откладывают, тем больше жертв здесь, и тем больше и катастрофическая перспектива выглядывает для европейского содружества, к большому сожалению.
It's now 16:45 in Kyiv, and it's being reported that the meeting between Zelensky and Trump on the margins of the NATO summit has already ended. It lasted 50 minutes. The press was not allowed after the meeting. By the way, Alexander, I'm thinking maybe we should try to come at this from the other side. I don't mean the United States, but China, for example. We realize that China and North Korea are essentially the two countries that have stayed and continue to help Putin wage war against Ukraine. Can we try to establish relations specifically with China?
Путину вести эту войну против Украины, можем ли мы как-то налаживать отношения именно с Китаем?
This is all an illusion since it is China that is coordinating this war. It is supplying Russia with arms, including through Iran, investing in the Iranian economy in order to maintain these supplies. With the consent of China and North Korea, munitions and drone manufacturing facilities are being set up in Russia and DPRK. Because of this, North Korean soldiers, instructors, sappers, and engineers end up in Russia and in the occupied Ukrainian territories, participating in combat operations against the Ukrainian army. Kursk region is a vivid example of who was used and how. China is systematically managing this process because it benefits from the weakening of the United States. Its resources and attention are being dispersed between Israel, Ukraine, and other regions. This creates space for Beijing to prepare for a future confrontation with Taiwan and the Americans in the Pacific.
И создает возможности для себя постепенно готовиться к противостоянию с Тайванем и с американцами в Тихоокеанском регионе.
What happened with Iran clearly showed that Putin is only acting in his own interests. He has not made a choice yet, and in the context of the Sino-American confrontation, he may try to jump the gun. The Chinese are seriously tense. Note that Xi Jinping is not traveling to Brazil for the BRICS summit, nor is he planning talks with Russian representatives, including Putin. Moreover, there are rumors that Xi Jinping is seriously ill. The information is classified, everything looks suspicious. It is not by chance that Lukashenko met with him very briefly. Even then, there was talk about his poor condition. It seems to me that if Putin loses China, and this may happen not because someone will establish relations with China, but because China will be pressured or something extraordinary will happen there, connected with the regime, then the war will come to an end, it will stop.
Китаем кто-то подружится, потому что на Китай могут надавить, или потому что в Китае что-то произойдет в ближайшее время чрезвычайное, скажем так, связанное с режимом. Вот если Путин потеряет Китай, тогда войне конец. Тогда война остановится.
The Chinese may abandon him. If they realize that they can negotiate with the Americans on favorable terms, they will leave Putin without support, and he will have neither resources nor strength to continue the war against Ukraine. He understands this perfectly well. Right now, he is completely dependent on the favor with which China views the Russian regime. Once Beijing gets angry or turns away, the war is over. I think we're getting closer to that point. Telegram feeds are reporting that Trump supported Ukraine's arguments, the meeting went well, waiting for details, hopefully at least from the Ukrainian side. Imagine we wake up or turn on the air in the evening, and the news. Trump gives Ukraine Tauruses. Putin is finished, Trump authorized to hit Moscow. No, not Tauruses, Tomahawks. And full authorization to hit Moscow. Moscow is on fire. I'd like to record this broadcast. Moscow is burning right now.
А представляете, просыпаемся, Анастасия, или вот сегодня вечером смотрим наш с вами эфир, и новость. Трамп дает Украине Таурус, Путину конец. Трамп разрешил Украине бить всем по Москве. Да, это не Таурусы, простите, томагавки. И разрешил Украине бить всем по Москве. Москва горит. Все.
Хочу уже, знаете, такой эфир записать. Москва горит прямо сейчас в эти минуты.
Let's help the armed forces of Ukraine to make this a reality. Be sure to support the military, write words of gratitude, make donations. It's really important. Don't forget to give this video a like, and if possible, share it so that as many people as possible can see the truth, get a quality analysis, and understand what is happening in Russia's war against Ukraine. Thank you for your attention. I wish you good news, and see you soon.
Сейчас в войне России против Украины. Всем спасибо за внимание. Желаю хороших новостей и до встречи.
До новых встреч.